So let's look back to what we considered last night. Are there now two Americas, and are you caught in a battle for the America that affirms God's law? It seems like a time of calamity. What is calamity in the biblical context? What is the trouble that faces us? We asked. We're all agreed that we are seeing a culture rot, to quote Reverend Phillips. What is the cause of this? The scriptures tell us that the world is caught, trapped in corruption. And if the trouble is corruption, what can we do to escape from its hold? Especially, what do the scriptures tell us? What can free us from the grip of corruption? Now, you know the answer to this question. But let's see what a lot of Christians say. Here's the start of an answer to both these questions from a pastor, a man who knows Scripture. His sermon is titled, Christians Losing America.
We're living in a world that is decaying away, that's just rotting away. And man by nature is exactly that way. He's dead while he lives. He's decaying, he's dying as he lives. And our responsibility is that of holding back the corruption that we see in the world. And one of the most self-evident things in the world is the fact that man is morally corrupt.
Now, what can we do about the problem of, as the Reverend Creech put it here, Christians losing America? America is slipping away. It was in Christian hands, I think the Reverend Creech is saying, because it was in the hands of the founders, who may not all have been Christians, but who lived under and spoke for the one law, the respect for which is a legacy of Christianity. But it is no longer, because those charged with key tasks on this ship of state. In America, no one person's task is steering this ship. That job belongs to the people as a whole. But those charged with key tasks on this ship clearly reject that law. One last illustration of what is underway before we move on from the problem to what can be done. I have no special concern with homosexuality. I never sit down and start talking about gays with that tone people sometimes add to that word. But I have ended up writing more than once about gay issues because of things happening in the law. What things?
The acceptance of gay marriage will bring along with it a certain sweeping away of lingering doubts and hesitations about gay-lesbian life itself. If one accepts gay marriage, then in the sweep of things, one comes to accept more readily the notion of gays and the gay life. Something fully legitimate, beyond reproach, as a way of life, a way of being that should be accepted. To have the same-sex marriage accepted as nothing less now than a constitutional right is to provide an anchoring point in the law. And I take this as the pivot in my talk today, an anchoring point in the law, in the acceptance of same-sex marriage as a constitutional right. And from that point, the law may extend outward to reach fields quite remote from marriage, fields and arenas in which it becomes possible to affirm and affirm again with the powers of law that people with lingering reservations about homosexuality must proceed. They must either keep those sentiments to themselves or run the risk of being stigmatized and thrust out of positions of consequence in careers that are public and private. In his striking address at the Cooper Union in February 1860, Lincoln brought out the other dimension of the problem, what I might call the darker side of rights. He remarked that if slavery is right, all words, acts, laws, and constitutions against it are themselves wrong and should be silenced and swept away. Several years ago, a good friend of mine, a senior partner in one of the most prestigious law firms in New York, was quoted in a trade paper among lawyers when he expressed his dubiety about laws that moved in a sweeping way to ban all discriminations based on sexual orientation. He's a serious Catholic, but his views on this matter are shared by many people who are not Catholic. But in the case of this senior lawyer, when his position became so publicly known, he was dropped from the recruitment of his law firm before it was sent out to recruit at Harvard. And we could set out the rationale. The senior partners at a law firm will pass on the hiring and promotion of young associates. If senior partners contain people who are known already to hold an adverse judgment on homosexuality, then the complaint can be lodged that the situation is rigged from the outset, or at least tilted against the associate who's gay or lesbian. The very presence in the firm of partners with a moral judgment against homosexuality means that there is already from the beginning a condition that makes possible the filing of a grievance and flowing from that some vexing, expensive litigation. And by the way, I hasten to add here that what I'm offering is not, as they say these days so crudely, an anecdote. I'm offering a case, an instance that reflects a principle at work. Law firms are nothing if not responsive to incentives. And if the notion takes hold that the very presence in the firm of people with rather pronounced moral and religious views on homosexuality makes the firm deeply vulnerable to litigation, many firms will find it incentive to foreclose the problem at the very threshold by the simple expedient of avoiding the hiring of people, shall we say, who are overly religious.
And soon after Professor Arkes spoke about this, a woman, Vanessa Willock, approached Elaine Huguenin, co-owner with her husband Jonathan of Elaine Photography in Albuquerque, to photograph a commitment ceremony that this and another woman wanted to hold. Huguenin declined because her Christian beliefs are in conflict with the message communicated by the ceremony, which Willock asked Huguenin to help her celebrate. The woman filed a complaint with the New Mexico Human Rights Commission accusing Elaine Photography of discrimination based on sexual orientation, which ruled in her favor, ordering the company to pay over $6,000 in attorney's fees to the women who filed the complaint. The ruling was appealed in the appellate court, which upheld the decision. And then it went to the New Mexico Supreme Court, which also upheld the ruling. 3 decisions against the photographer. That Supreme Court opinion in the state of New Mexico concluded with the following remarks from one of the justices, which are well worth reading. The Huguenots now are compelled by law to compromise the very religious beliefs that inspire their lives. Though the rule of law requires it, the result is sobering. It will no doubt leave a tangible mark on the Huguenots and others of similar views. This case provokes reflection on what this nation is all about, its promise of fairness, liberty, equality of opportunity, and justice. At its heart, this case teaches that at some point in our lives, all of us must compromise, if only a little, to accommodate the contrasting values of others. A multicultural, pluralistic society, one of our nation's strengths, demands no less. The Huguenots are free to think, to say, to believe as they wish. They may pray to the God of their choice and follow those commandments in their personal lives wherever they lead. The Constitution protects the Huguenots in that respect and much more. But there is a price, one that we all have to pay somewhere in our civic life. That compromise is a part of the glue that holds us together as a nation. The tolerance that lubricates the varied moving parts of us as a people. That sense of respect we owe others, whether or not we believe as they do, illuminates this country, setting it apart from the discord that afflicts much of the rest of the world. In short, I would say to the Huguenots with the utmost respect, it is the price of citizenship. Wow, indeed. Could you be required, as the price of citizenship, in your country to celebrate what you think is against God's law. Or because I suspect we wouldn't go out and take the pictures. I mean, really, can you imagine taking celebratory pictures in the frame of mind of legal compulsion? Could you be required to abstain and be fined? Obviously, the answer is yes. So the decay we are seeing is not just the people falling in tow behind new trends. It is also the heads of government who believe the old laws are trumped by other laws. The old laws about marriage are trumped by existing laws about liberty and equality. Here, I guess, liberty and equality get it on. Somehow they just came to notice they were both, we all get the picture. Uncle Sam is not the president. He is a personification of the people. But by that token, he includes every member of government. And so he is the people crushed by the collapse of an order. But he is also fallen. Uncle Sam is fallen. And it is his fall, or should I say his fallenness, that brought down this order, that is changing this set of laws and institutions and habits that once reflected God's. We looked yesterday at the trouble arising in a divided America, which we called evidence of cultural decay. I hardly need to remind you of the symptoms of this ailment. For instance, the punishment of Christians who lose jobs in medicine, jobs they have trained for in a profession that is a real calling, people with real gifts of care. But never mind. Christians unwilling to prescribe contraceptives should just get out of these fields of medicine. Christians unwilling to accept the public school standard of care for children should get out of these schools, go to private schools. But they should still fund the public schools. Christians unwilling to join in the validation of lifestyles repugnant to them should be pressured to join in or pay for refusing. These are different instances of the punishment and marginalization of Christians and the Christian outlook. One kind of decay. And it is a decay, a decline, since it was Christians fleeing punishment and marginalization who founded America, which provided a haven for their views. A second general symptom of decay is the coarsening of Americans. Coarse solutions like the killing of human beings as a remedy to problems. Suffering occurs. Suffering of all kinds. Severe pain, yes. But also blindness. The inability to continue to dance. Ordinary dying. And the solution to all of this suffering? Euthanasia. Abortion is a way out of a different cause of suffering. Many more children than you can handle. A boyfriend who will leave if you have this baby. Exposure of your infidelity. And the solution is, once again, to kill a human being. It might not even be suffering at all, but simply your wishes. I do not want a child yet. Solution, to kill this child. He or she already exists. There was a time when people seemed unsure whether a zygote is a human being, and so they call it a zygote. In 1973, the Supreme Court wrote that those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus as to what is created at fertilization. Well, that group can't arrive at a consensus on anything. But set aside the fallacy here, which is called ignorance of the question. Today, by contrast, many defenders of abortion are quite ready to say, I know it is human. It's not a fish, for goodness sake. Of course we're killing human beings. If you were to name the moment of American history of which Americans are the proudest, all Americans, what would it be? Might very well be the end of slavery. Dr. Lincoln's new elixir of life. Lincoln, in the eyes of many, the greatest president, who brought about what you see here because of what he understood about slavery, which he expressed in such a way that every American could understand it too, whether they hated slavery or counted on it to sustain their economy. He said, I never knew a man who wished to be himself a slave. Consider if you know any good thing that no man desires for himself. That argument, which once justified the abolition of slavery, would also justify the abolition of abortion. But the people sensitive to the violation of this principle in the case of the slave have become hardened against it in the case of the unborn. They will praise the principle in one setting and fight it in another. What kind of person would do that? But as I remind us of these symptoms, I want to remind you of what they are symptoms of. They are symptoms of the corruption that has a grip on all of creation. So the question, how could someone do such a thing, must instantly give way to understanding. A Christian understands. A Christian is a person who understands the power of this disease. A Christian is sorry for the patient, not sorry for him in a mocking and superior way, but truly sorry that the disease is so far advanced in these people. But more symptomatology. Unfortunately, there is more under the heading of coarsening. It is not restricted to killing. Once pornography was somewhat comical postcards, but now it involves fierce acts of degradation. And women who in the 70s called that degradation out increasingly say it is not degradation. They enjoy it, and they are willing participants. In this well-received work of fiction based on life, chosen by both the New York Times and the New Yorker as one of the best books of 2012, the author writes about modern relationships. How Should a Person Be is the title. The subtitle, A Novel from Life. The heroine daydreams about the guy she is sleeping with. You can take your hands and bruise my neck. Keep pushing till you feel the soft flesh at the back of my throat, so the tears roll down my cheeks like they do every time you, etc. Even when you hear me gagging, you don't stop. It is your unconcern that makes me want you to do whatever you want to my body, which can be for you while yours cannot be for me. I can see that your body must be for many women. Do whichever sluts it's your fancy to do. I miss the old feminism. I'm not sure that this is something the heroine comes to think better of or is later ashamed of. It is an expression of her love. The suggestion is that people love in weird and uncharted ways. A third symptom of decay is the dissolution of the family. But you've all seen the statistics, the birth rate, children thought of as an obstacle to your life, the broken homes. A fourth symptom of decay is what might be called the loosening of sexual morality. But that way of putting it does not get to the heart of the trouble. The problem is the undermining of human sexuality, the bending of nature till it breaks. Justice for gays has taken the form of the normalization of homosexuality and transgender living, so that more young people are now not sure how to live, as if sex were not problematic enough already. The severing of sex from the context of family has cost us families and children, with all the economic dominoes toppled by that, though I should say not toppled. It has also made the transition to family increasingly hard, with the effects of STIs, hormone manipulation, and abortion. The ongoing normalization of pornography has damaged men who have parachuted degrading actions dreamed up by filmmakers into relationships with real women that these men care about, creating huge and injurious confusions that these people will spend far too much time finding their way back from, if they are ever rescued. What is at stake? If this is not corrected, what? The marginalization or punishment of Christians is going to hurt Christians, of course. Christians will lose money and jobs. But marginalized Christians pushed out of medicine, driven from the running of orphanages, Christian organizations whose operations are cut back by penalties, will be helping Americans less. That those Catholic orphanages that shut themselves down no longer deny adoption to same-sex couples, that this is an advance of justice in the eyes of many Americans. Well, it's hard to see how this balances out as a good even in their eyes. Is avoiding offense to the same-sex couples who would approach a Catholic institution really of more value to America than the orphanage service provided by those institutions, which are now gone? There is going to be a cost in care. The coarsening of Americans is going to create an ugly and cruel America. The dissolution of the family is going to hurt Americans who will increasingly live alone, with all the insecurity, psychological and material, that implies. Single mothers, single men, children alienated from parents who had no proper model of what it means to be a parent, old people without children to care for them. To injure the family is to attack the capacity of human beings to live in society. This is an attack on man's essence. Man, said Aristotle, was made to live in society. The undermining of human sexuality means that sex does not unite, but as it brings people closer, exposes them to deeper injury when they are demeaned, used, and cast off. By undermining, I mean that sexuality lived in one way bears fruit. And if you live it in a different way, it does not bear that fruit. But it does bear fruit. The biblical notion of a tree bearing fruit is not fruit versus no fruit, but good fruit versus bad fruit. Sex lived differently brings forth a different fruit. It builds people into consumers of experience, hungering selves. What they are committed to in sexual adventure, Pascal, Aquinas, and Augustine all said, is the very kind of thing that will never let them rest. What sexuality lived in this way does is turn the nation into frustrated people. The stakes are very high. So what can be done about this? What practical and effective action can one take against this kind of thing? There is political action. All of these decisions are made by people. There are people on the bench of the New Mexico Supreme Court and the Supreme Court in Washington. If these people are appointed, they are appointed by elected officials. So you can work to elect people on your side. And you have the whole spectrum of electoral politics, all the way from the president down to the school board. But in America, political action can't be control of government, control of the school board, because government represents the people. If about half the people elect their person in a given election, the other half of the people won't be happy about it. And in the next election, they will likely mobilize to correct that. That's the fair democratic process. So ultimately, you have to change the views of the people. You have to change this 50-50 America, change the two-colored map. And how will you do that? By showing people that they are wrong about a whole list of things. Wrong about whether resisting same-sex marriage is bigotry. Wrong about what marriage really is. Wrong about the meaning of love. Dr. Patrick said last night that we're facing unfair treatment and we've got to make it plain. So wrong about rights of conscience. Wrong about who Christians are. Wrong about contraceptives. Wrong about sex. Really, where does it end? And to that list, you have to add another thing. You have to convince people that these are things over which people can be right. Teach them that they are not matters of opinion. You have to convince people that beliefs about things like health and welfare and sex and family and love are true or false, not irresolvable, impossible to resolve, and therefore open to each person to settle as he sees fit. If you don't think that's a tall order, look up tall order in the dictionary. You have to convince the Supreme Court of this, because it has already been stated in the law that you are wrong. There is no final answer to these questions. Each person has the right to define his own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. So you have to teach people, correct them on these things. And what are the means at hand for you to do this? Shall we say reasoning and argument and exhortation? You have to call them away from erroneous views and lead them by good cogent arguments to the truth. What should you do about corruption? I've just mentioned political responses and exhortation and argument. What else? Prayer. Prayer is an interesting answer, but it is an answer with an implication. We are not going to change this. You're not asking for power, are you, to do this yourself? If you pray, aren't you asking that God change it? Prayer is an answer from Scriptures. Is there anything else that the Scriptures say that we could do about this decay? So let's go back to those questions I left with you last night. What do the Scriptures say you should do about corruption? I've tried to talk about the seriousness of the trouble facing us. Some Christians play various aspects of this down. Frederica Matthews Green says, the protest that permitting same-sex marriage amounts to redefining marriage comes decades too late. Quick and easy divorce has already dumbed down marriage until it's little more than a joke. Stephen Long, a United Methodist minister and professor of systematic theology at Marquette University, says that there is nothing to be done about this politically. Christians, he says, should probably not go into politics. Unless, I think he's saying, his point is about character. Unless they are prepared to pay the price of utmost integrity, which is a short political career. Only if they are scrupulously honest should they do it, and this is going to cost them. Some seem to suggest that there is nothing to be done about various parts of this problem. It is not our battle. Looking at these problems, confronted with the headlines like this, it is possible we might have forgotten where we finished last night. Yesterday we asked about the nature of the trouble, biblically. The trouble is corruption. I think we agree with the Reverend Preach. Now let's return to the questions I've asked that we haven't answered. 4 questions. What in medicine is the cause of return to health? Does anyone think of an answer to this question? I would say that is a condition, because the ability is there whether something is done or not. Return to homeostasis, is that what I heard? Repentance, but we're talking about something physical. Repentance is a part of the cause.
There are many causes.
Many causes. Anything else? Anything left out? What's the cause of the yield of the harvest? Is that a different question or the same question? Is there something that has to be done for that yield to occur? And do you attribute the yield to what was done? In the biblical use of the healing analogy, what do the scriptures pick from physical health as a stand-in for or symbol of the cause of salvation? Anyone have an answer to this? Death, rebirth, resurrection. Although that would be the name of the state of your freeing. What is the cause of the freeing that we call resurrection? One could, of course, mention treatments. Now remember, what do the scriptures pick from physical health? From physical health. As a stand-in for or symbol of the cause of salvation. Treatments. But what about the power of God? What form of response to decay do you recall from Scripture? Is there anywhere in the Scriptures that actual decay, corruption is implied? And is anything mentioned there as a curative, a response to decay? What else? What is the thing that people usually, the image that people usually remember?
When you do become genuinely saved, you're going to have a completely new focus in life. You're going to begin to assume the responsibility of a genuine Christian, and that is being the salt of the earth. The function of salt is to keep back putrefaction. It holds back decay. Well, the implications of such a thought is that we're living in a world that is decaying away, that's just rotting away. And our responsibility is that of holding back the corruption that we see in the world. If the function of salt is that of holding back corruption, then what are Christians supposed to do? Well, we're supposed to go out here and be a practical voice against moral corruption. We're talking about a problem. It's addressing a putrefying problem.
But let's move beyond the metaphor of decay, corruption, which stands for our spiritual death. There are other biblical metaphors for spiritual death. Anything named in the scriptures that would be a very effective response to this problem of spiritual death?
In the letters to the churches, it's returning to your first love.
Return to your first love. And so that is a message to whom?
To the church.
To the church. So leaving. What makes it possible to leave? What else is a very effective response to this problem of spiritual death in the scriptures?
So the whole concept of rebirth or renewal, being a new creature.
So I would say that this is the state to which you are moved. You're moved into the state of a new being, the state of rebirth, which is your escape. And so my question is, what has to be done and what is done to make that happen? What is pointed out in the scriptures about this? Spiritual death is also represented as darkness. So then when light comes, that darkness is driven away. So what is happening at Pentecost that is the causal? It is the Spirit. The Spirit. What about love or service?
So we have two purposes. One is to hold back corruption, and the other is to educate. We are the light of the world. Light in Scripture is a symbol of knowledge. It's a symbol of understanding. And that's the business of the church, is that of educating. We're the only ones that can provide people with proper understanding, a proper understanding of what life is all about. No one else can do that. This 13th verse that says, "Ye are the salt of the earth," as we understand that the function of salt is that of holding back corruption. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot divorce the concept that's presented here in this verse from the relationship of the church and government, or citizens within the church to government. Because this is our purpose in life, is dealing with immorality.
You cannot divorce the concept that's presented here in this verse, he said, from the relationship of the church and government, or citizens within the church to government, because this is our purpose in life, dealing with immorality. Salt and light are the images. This is the pivotal force that can stop the decline. It's not the only thing, but this is often mentioned.
Renewal. As Christians, it's what we want, isn't it? We want to see the tides turned, change in our homes, neighborhoods, and churches. The world turned upside down for the glory of Christ. We want to be salt. We want to be light. But how? It starts with a journey of rediscovery and restoration. Are you ready? Are you ready to join in the work of renewal and regeneration? Are you prepared to fearlessly carry the radiance of truth into the darkness? Are you equipped to defend the faith with the light of reason and hope? You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Are you ready?
I wanted to show you all of that for a reason. You see here a thrilling call to be the force of change that holds back the corruption and then sheds light and restores what has been lost. But what does it say nothing about? Related to this, I want to stop to remind us that we arrived yesterday at a second image of the solution to this problem that is not the same as this. What was the image yesterday? The image of the solution to the problem of corruption and death was the image of Christ. Christ crucified. The cross being aligned over the skull of death, ready to be smashed by the archangel Michael. The death of death. If all of this trouble is death, the solution is clear. Isn't it? Why isn't it clear? It isn't clear because of death itself. The hold of death is broken, as you know. Where? If the problem is corruption and death, there is no escape on this earth outside Christ. That is not a peculiar idea, but a simple reading of the Scriptures. That is the message of Christianity itself. And yet the words about salt and light come from the mouth of Jesus himself. Are there two answers? Do these answers fit together somehow? The most obvious way they fit together might be that Christians are salt and light, and they cannot be Christians without Christ. The corruption and decay can be halted by the salt of the Christian, by what the Christian brings to his fellow citizen. Salt is the metaphor that explains the healing effect of halting the decay, and light is the metaphor for what the Christian brings. Illumination, instruction in the truth, teaching, knowledge imparted by reason, said the pastor we heard. But where is Christ in this operation of restoration? If I got you to stop and answer that question, I suspect you might write several different things. You might say Christ is the inspiration for you to go out into the culture, as he went out to preach in Galilee. Or he is the source of the knowledge that you impart. Or he is the cause that brought me to the knowledge that I want to give to my brothers and sisters. Or he is the creator of the world and of the law that is in the world. The idea of natural law is that right and wrong are inscribed in the nature of things. What is good for the heart in medicine is what supports its proper functioning, etc. In the same way, what is good for human beings is what supports their functioning. These laws, people say, can be extracted from nature itself. As one writer puts it, no one could share our human nature, yet fail to be bound by the precepts of the natural law. That is, they apply to every human being by virtue of the nature that we possess. So the light that we spread in teaching this law was given to us by him, since he is the light of the world. But in all of these answers, he is behind you, the inspiration, the source, the creator, the one who gave you the knowledge of right and wrong that you spread. But when I turned from corruption to life, he was not behind anyone. He was not off in the background, an inspiration to the people talking to me. Because I wasn't talking to any people. I was talking to him. I came to him. And if I didn't, if it were not the Lord himself that I had somehow come to know, I would not have changed. So how do these two solutions, Christ on the one hand, salt and light on the other, fit together? Someone might have the bright idea that Christ, in relation to the problem of corruption and death, is the theological solution, whereas the action of Christians in America, teaching the law, persuading of the good, is the practical solution. We Christians are the hands of Christ acting in the world. We are the practical solution. Well, let's see. Let's look now in a concrete way at what we can do practically to make a difference. Let's look at the symptoms of decay and the specific action we imagine to be suited to rolling them back as SALT halts decay. Take the marginalization and punishment of Christians, thanks to the Affordable Care Act. Just with regard to the funding or provision of contraceptives. To see how to respond to this particular bit of the decay, we have to look at what is happening in this. Clearly, the American people have different views on contraceptives. A legal memorandum by the Heritage Foundation says, under Obamacare, employers are required to pay for coverage of contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs. While this mandate exempts formal houses of worship, all other religious employers, hospitals, schools, social service organizations, and the like, and all for-profit businesses must comply or risk burdensome fines. Sandra Fluke, a lawyer who may be running this year for a seat in the California State Senate, spoke in 2012 to Congress about the Conscience Clause exemptions in healthcare, specifically with respect to covering contraception. While a student at Georgetown University, a Catholic institution, the nation's oldest Catholic and Jesuit university, the school calls itself, she argued against the school having an exemption. Quote, in the media lately, conservative Catholic organizations have been asking, what did we expect when we enrolled at a Catholic school? We can only answer that we expected women to be treated equally, to not have our school create untenable burdens that impede our academic success. We expected that our schools would live up to the Jesuit creed of cura personalis, to care for the whole person, by meeting all of our medical needs. Now, you will see why I mention this in a moment. In November of last year, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the second most influential bench in the land behind the Supreme Court, ruled in favor of Christian business owners who fought the requirement that they provide health insurance that covers birth control. So, what is going to happen? The Supreme Court has agreed, in light of that ruling, to review 2 of the for-profit cases later this year. The court will consider 2 questions. Does the mandate violate the First Amendment guarantee of the free exercise of religion? And who can exercise religion under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act? Now, thinking about action, about what we can do to have the effect of salt and light, because this video doesn't answer that. It excites you to think that you will be this force. But that question still remains to be answered. Thinking about action, consider what is happening here. When later this year the Supreme Court answers the question, does Obamacare violate the First Amendment guarantee of the free exercise of religion, you are going to have 9 judges telling you what they think the First Amendment means. That is the American process. And then look at the second question. Who can exercise religion under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, which states that the government shall not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion unless, and there are 2 conditions, that if met mean the government can burden a person's exercise of religion. First, is that burden necessary for the furtherance of a compelling government interest? And a compelling interest is one directly bound to core constitutional concerns like equality. Second, is this rule the least restrictive way in which to further that government interest? My question here is, does it look to you like the checks and balances of the American form of government will keep everything in order? The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled in your favor, but there is another court that trumps it. And let's just take a bright view of the future and say that the Supreme Court comes down on your side. Do you think that the medical profession will stop rattling its sabers, so to speak? The American people have different views about contraceptives, and go back to that comment by Sandra Fluck. Different views about the meaning of health medical needs. We expected that our schools, she said, would live up to the Jesuit creed of cura personalis, to care for the whole person by meeting all of our medical needs. Can people have a different understanding of health than you do? I can't believe that anyone here could say no to that, because you've been watching medicine embrace things that the original Hippocratic Oath ruled out as contrary to the practice. The very fact that there is an old Hippocratic Oath, the fact I learned from Dr. Patrick, proves the point. But something in you might have wanted to say, but people with a new understanding of health contrary to the traditional do not really have a correct understanding of health. Correct and incorrect views. What territory are we in now? We're in the territory of the truth. Is it true that the pill is a medical need? Is it true that the care of health includes the provision of safe abortions, contraceptives? Is it true that health care includes pills that serve reproductive freedom by killing human beings in the embryonic phase of life? In the Western tradition, the faculty or human power whose job is to ascertain what is true and what is false, to sift these things. And so here you see a personification of this art or skill, holding a sieve, is called reason. America, because America is just a swatch of the earth, is awash in correct and incorrect views about health, about what medicine is for, about the duty of a doctor, about the meaning of the First Amendment, about the meaning of marriage, about the purpose of sex, about what is a sufficiently pressing government interest. The Supreme Court could find no compelling state interest in preserving the traditional definition of marriage when it examined the Defense of Marriage Act. They could find no state interest. So there is our problem. We need to sift out the gold and throw the dirt away. Now, how are we going to do that? What does man have by which to sort these views into the right piles? All the true views in one pile, all the false views in another. The next step does seem to be to name the tool or the treatment by which to fix this. Isn't the tool going to be some kind of sieve, some kind of separating process, whereby we can identify the truth so all can see it? And so my question is, what does man have by which to separate true from false, by which to sort these views into the right piles? If your answer is the truth, we have the truth. It has already been sorted for us by God. And if by that you mean we have the correct answer to a given question, abortion kills children. God has ruled on marriage. Well, when we put the correct answer before Americans, will the power of the truth convert them to it? All I need to do is show you this picture, and you see that isn't happening. Marching, by the way, is a symptom of loss of faith in reason. All through Christian history, up to the 19th century, reasoning, which is an art, was taught by Christians who said that merely stating the conclusion you had arrived at was not reasoning. The text that was taught at Cambridge and Oxford for 2 centuries was written by Isaac Watts, the author of hymns you have all sung. You have to find the way to show the flaws in your opponent's reasoning, which are called fallacies. Very few of the signs that people carry do that. So what about reasoning, the effort to convince? Thomas Aquinas was a great proponent of reasoning. Even though the Summa was written by Thomas himself, it is really a kind of debate. Aquinas asks 613 questions in the Summa. Is it true that whatever? And he starts by laying out usually 3 different complete arguments, not conclusions, complete arguments that reach the conclusion, it is false that. And then he shows the weakness in those 3 arguments, one by one. To debate is not to assert conclusions. It is to exchange your reasons for believing those conclusions and to assess those reasons. Marching is also a sign of people's unwillingness to reason together. Is it better for me to enter into debate with my opponent? And by that I mean Aquinas' understanding of debate, not ours. True debate means actually answering my opponent's questions as truthfully as possible, actually speaking to the reasons he gives and showing the flaws in them. Not just giving my own chosen arguments for my own chosen points, as if my opponent isn't even there. Is it better for me, for our cause, to truly debate with my opponent, do we think? Which means I might be beaten. He might show that he knows more than I do. He might pull out better arguments. And he can mock me and make me look bad. Or is it better for me to keep the advantage I now have? What's the question here? Should I think about my advantage, strategically protect the gains of my side, which can be put at risk if I enter into a debate concerned with the truth? Or should I simply care about the truth and always debate? When the scriptures say, "Come now, let us reason together," that is an invitation. Is every invitation accepted? Debate is necessarily voluntary. What does man have by which to discredit falsehood? It isn't possession of the truth. If the answer then is reasoning, reasoning can be resisted. But even when people enter into argument with you, employing reason, is it the case that the truth comes out? And here's an interesting question. What did the founders think? In the Federalist Papers, number 31, Alexander Hamilton says this: "In disquisitions of every kind, there are certain primary truths, or first principles, upon which all subsequent reasonings must depend. These contain an internal evidence which, antecedent to all reflection or combination, commands the assent of the mind." What Hamilton calls first principles here, drawing on Aristotle, others have called first things, origin of the name of the journal, meaning the same thing. Political philosopher Robert George calls these sets of basic practical principles, or fundamental principles, like the principles in the first couple of sentences in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But George explains that the idea of self-evidence here is that simply from our own experience, on the basis of rational reflection on data provided by our own experiences of life, he says, of the value of liberty, etc., we can see the importance of these goods. Some of you have heard of natural law, which has to do with the right and wrong that people are naturally able to see. That is what George is talking about. He says these basic human goods, life, liberty, are what Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century called the first principles of practical reason and the basic precepts of natural law. In other words, we might say there are basic facts about what is good that we cannot avoid accepting. Basic facts about what is good that we cannot avoid accepting. But now let's go back to Hamilton. There are certain primary truths or first principles upon which all subsequent reasonings must depend. These contain an internal evidence which commands the assent of the mind. But before you even get arguments, you can see that these basic things are true. Where it produces not this effect, that is, what does he say? Where this evidence does not have the effect of making people affirm that these things are basic goods, does not have the effect of making people claim these good things to be perfectly evident, self-evident. Hamilton is allowing that this may not happen. It must proceed either from some defect or disorder in the organs of perception or from the influence of some strong interest or passion or prejudice. Now, this claim is not surprising to anyone who has studied Christian thought, because Christians have been saying from the very beginning that man, in his sinful condition, is governed by his passions, which prejudice us in their favor, so that we not only chase what we want, but defend and justify our behavior. This is the wayward law in our members, the worm in our flesh. The Apostle Paul, the early church fathers like Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, John Calvin, George Whitefield, Charles Spurgeon, all said century after century that our powers are injured. We have natural powers to see. They are in our nature, to be sure. But we cannot use them. That is our problem. That is our problem. Let's look for just a moment at Thomas Aquinas, whom George cites as a major influence. A lot of people suspect Aquinas of overlooking the mark of the fall and overestimating man's natural powers. Francis Schaeffer thought Aquinas did not accept that reason is fallen. Overestimating man's natural powers, his rational powers. One writer, commenting on Robert George's views, says this, speaking of Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas' anthropology, his view of man and man's condition, does not support the strength of George's claim for the universal availability of self-evident truths or principles. The first problem concerns the meaning of self-evidentness in the work of Thomas Aquinas. Robert George's claims about self-evident moral truths are much stronger than the claims of Aquinas. For Thomas, self-evident does not mean universally known. In fact, Thomas distinguishes between propositions that are self-evident in themselves and to all people, and those which, although self-evident in themselves, are only recognized as such by the wise. That is how I read Aquinas. What does Aquinas say here about our condition? He says that man cannot use his natural powers fully as he should without being moved to it by God. In case you doubt this, let me just show you. He says, in the state of corrupt nature. Now, what's the state he's talking about? The state of corrupt nature. In order to be healed and to carry out works of supernatural virtue. In order to carry out works of virtue which are meritorious, man needs a gratuitous strength superadded to natural strength. He says that in our nature we have the potential to be virtuous, the potential to see the truth, but we don't have the power, the will. All virtues are in us by nature, he says, according to aptitude, but not according to perfection. That we ever come to have these powers put into our nature by God is a matter of salvation. Whatever good we are able to do naturally by our own power, and I believe we can do good naturally by our own power, but whatever that is, will sink us. It is far too little. We have to be healed. The good works we are called to are works of supernatural virtue, says Aquinas. What we are really called to see the truth. Works of supernatural virtue. And for this, Aquinas says, man needs a gratuitous strength superadded to natural strength. End quote. Where does this come from, this power? This is a power given to us. By what? Says Aquinas, by Christ, who is the way by which we tend to God. That is Aquinas' description of part 3 of the Summa, Christ, who is the way by which we tend to God. Summa is in three parts. The first part is about God. Second is about man, his purpose, his powers, his condition. And the third part, which is not an addendum tacked on at the end, but the means by which man can attain his purpose, is about Christ. It is Christ who makes the escape from our condition possible. It is not a power, it is a person. And it is through this person that the power to see even comes. That is how it was in my life. I could see many things before my conversion, but I was quite incapacitated despite all this truth and justice. I was greatly hampered in my ability to use reason, and I had the gift of a careful mind and a will to think things through. But I saw according to my wisdom, which was very dark indeed. Augustine said, the soul needs three things. It must have eyes, which it can use effectively, the eyes of the soul. It must look. What if it has the eyes and it doesn't bother to look? And then, when it does look, it must see. And what if it looks and it still can't see? Well, notice what comes next. The soul's eyes consist of a mind free from every taint of the body, turned away and purified from all desire for temporal things. What is this desire for temporal things? This is what Hamilton was talking about. This is the ancient trouble, some strong interest or passion. The passion is to enjoy the fruits of this earth. People see the good in sexuality because God put it there. Pleasure is good. Even when that pleasure is bad for you before you are married. The students at Georgetown University who want contraceptives, primarily not married. Even when that pleasure is bad for you, it is there. Pleasure isn't bad. It is good. But unfortunately, an immediate and intense pleasure like sex has the power to crowd out our awareness of other important goods. The soul's eyes, says Augustine, consists of a mind turned away and purified from all desire for temporal things. Well, how does a person turn away from desire for temporal things? What is your answer to this question? I'm expecting one resounding answer. God. Only by the power of God. Only God. Augustine says this is a gift. God turns to you. And your responsiveness to his turning is called faith. It is faith alone which first brings about this state. So, does Augustine believe in the self-evidence of basic goods? The self-evidence of God, for instance? He writes, the mind cannot see unless it is healthy. Doesn't that make sense to you as physicians? The mind cannot see unless it is healthy. Therefore, God cannot be shown to a stained and sick mind because it is in the grip of death. Health, he says, is the precondition of seeing. And we don't naturally have health. Why are people tearing down America? Because they don't know what they have. The impulse to come to these people and say, you know better than this. Why don't you acknowledge what is self-evidently true? Is not the impulse of the Christian tradition. This is the reflex of the Enlightenment Christian, who thinks that reason is not, as Augustine said, stained and sick. An important word in the Declaration of Independence that is always, it seems to me, forgotten is we. We hold these truths to be self-evident. People read this as we human beings, or we the people, but I don't. We are such people who, by the grace of God, are able to hold these truths to be self-evident. According to Augustine or Aquinas or the Apostle Paul or Luther or Calvin, how else would this be possible? We. These people were graced with this restoration of their powers and they were speaking to others also able to see this, or at least that was their hope. So my question was, what does man have by which to separate true from false? Is the answer the truth, the idea of objective moral truth? If somebody finds the truth and declares that truth to others, that doesn't do it. Only the person who himself has the truth can separate true and false. So is the answer reason? It is if you have reason, but people don't have it. They're in the grip of what Paul called the flesh, which drives their thinking. They might be titans of logic, who can run circles around me in the ability to reach logical conclusions. I, like most everyone today, was never given any training in logic. But what they are doing with their minds is grasping and defending and protecting fundamental principles that are in accord with a life of desire for temporal things, as Augustine put it. And I notice in what Christians are actually doing on the issue of Obamacare a certain standoffishness that might be explained by this awareness. That is, instead of changing the minds of others about contraception and sex, the whole worldview, Christians are telling others that they won't move on these issues. Christians themselves will not move on these issues. They're not talking about what the others believe. They're talking about what the Christians believe and what they will do, which is stand their ground.
Christians are heirs of a 2,000-year-old tradition of proclaiming God's word, of seeking justice, of resisting tyranny, and of reaching out with compassion to the poor, oppressed, and suffering. Like those who've gone before us, Christians today are called to contribute to the common good. That's why we, as Orthodox, Catholic, and Evangelical Christians, have joined together to make a declaration. We don't agree about everything, but we act together in obedience to the God who's laid total claim on our lives, to affirm the sanctity of every human life, marriage as an institution between one man and one woman, and the inherent right of religious freedom for all. My name's Eric Metaxas. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a New Yorker, and I signed the Manhattan Declaration.
The title of this video on the Colson Center website is Manhattan Declaration, Tell the World, which is just what a declaration is. And this is one thing you can do, sign on, to tell the other America that you will not comply. They have fines, of course, to press you to comply. The declaration ends by saying, because we honor justice and the common good, we will not comply with any edict that purports to compel our institutions to participate in abortions, embryo-destructive research, assisted suicide and euthanasia, or any other anti-life act. Nor will we bend to any rule purporting to force us to bless immoral sexual partnerships, treat them as marriages or the equivalent, or refrain from proclaiming the truth as we know it about morality and immorality and marriage and the family. We will fully and ungrudgingly render to Caesar what is Caesar's, but under no circumstance will we render to Caesar what is God's. To sign this declaration is to say, you won't pay the fine and will submit to whatever happens. Now, I don't mock this by saying it is a game of chicken, because Martin Luther King Jr. played it and won. You're going to have to put a lot of people in jail if you don't acknowledge our rights. This is the declaration. How is this going to turn out? Nobody knows. The Manhattan Declaration seems to be really a kind of line in the sand. The whole idea of the document seems to be to steel Christians not to give in and prepare for a very serious confrontation down the road if the resistance is substantial enough. But it will not itself change the other side, and it may encourage the other side if too few sign on. After several years, I believe the number of signatures is still quite a bit less than 1 million. As for political action, the prayer of the Christian is sometimes that we would have good people in politics. Sometimes Christians pray for control of government.
Father, we call forth godly leaders in every single level of government, we call them forth right now to run for the city councils and the county commissions, to run for office and be a public servant in the state house, to be mayors, to be governors, to be congressmen, to be senators. Father, I call forth resources. As we saw in the state of Maine just a few days ago, that Maine became the 31st state, 31 out of 31, to protect marriage between one man and one woman. And we just call forth the other 29. We just call forth all 50 states. We call forth the other countries who will stand for God's institution. Not on our watch.
Well, you know what's happened since Maine. And if you think about it, in the American system of government, there is only one thing that control of government by Christian leaders could mean. And that is that the American people would be Christian. How else could the problematic character of the current situation be resolved? One side will always be energized by its basic understanding of right and wrong to fight back and reclaim any ground captured by the opposite side. Does any American want someone else's judgments imposed on him? The very idea of America is that the people decide. And how do the people do that? By electing representatives to make decisions and set the laws. Since marriage is the province of state laws, that means that a state may rule that marriage is what it has always been. But that also means that a state may redefine marriage. It may do what it thinks right, as the Supreme Court said in June 2013. But as Justice Scalia pointed out on the same day,
that very angry dissent 10 years ago did get one thing really, really right. Right there on page 15 of the angriest dissent of all time, he nailed it. This is from 10 years ago. Justice Scalia was furious about this. He said, the Texas statute undeniably seeks to further the belief of its citizens that certain forms of sexual behavior are immoral and unacceptable. The Bowers decision held that this was a legitimate state interest, but the court today reaches the opposite conclusion. The Texas statute, it says, furthers no legitimate state interest. If moral disapprobation of homosexual conduct is no legitimate state interest, then what justification could there possibly be for denying the benefits of marriage to homosexual couples? Right! And indeed, Justice Kennedy today cited that 10-year-old ruling twice, when he wrote today that the federal government has to recognize all marriages that are recognized in the states, even if some of them have the gay. What happens now in states that do not recognize all marriages? Everybody's been saying all day today that the court is essentially silent on Utah. The court doesn't say anything about states where same-sex marriage isn't legal. It's not really true. Once again, just like he did 10 years ago, Justice Scalia is pounding his chest and raging into the night angrily that his battle against gay rights is over. It's over because of this latest ruling. When that hypothetical couple that moved to Utah sues to try to make even Utah recognize that their marriage that is recognized by the federal government should be recognized by Utah too. When that happens, Justice Scalia says that today's ruling is going to give them everything they need to win that case and make Utah recognize same-sex marriages as well. He said in his dissent today, the view that this court will take about state prohibition of same-sex marriage is indicated beyond mistaking in today's opinion. He quotes all the court's reasoning about why the federal government has to recognize same-sex marriages, and then he says this: how easy it is, indeed how inevitable, to reach the same conclusion with regard to state laws denying same-sex couples marital status. He says it is only a pretense that today's prohibition of laws excluding same-sex marriage is confined to the federal government. He says the other shoe will drop about state laws banning same-sex marriage, quote, later, comma, maybe next term. You think he's right? Chris Perry and Sandy Steyer were two of the named plaintiffs in the California case, in the Prop 8 case that was decided today alongside DOMA. Watch how they put it.
We thank the justices for letting us get married in California, but that's not enough. It's got to go nationwide, and we can't wait for that day. It's not just about us. It's about kids in the South. It's about kids in Texas. And it's about kids everywhere. And we really, really want to take this fight and take it all the way and get equality for everyone.
Everyone in this entire country.
And you're seeing it all unfold. And then the state will teach in state-funded schools what the state sees fit to call marriage. That means that the state will teach through its education system that what your religion calls wrong is not wrong. It will vie with you in teaching your children. You will protest and say the state is denying you your rights. The right to have the school that you fund teach traditional values. But is that right named in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, state laws? You will think that this situation is positively evil, as I do. And you may sue, as one family did in Massachusetts, and then have your case dismissed, a further violation, more evil. But it's the same system. This is the very system that you believe in when it works in your favor. But what about when it works against you? I'm reminded of Churchill's point about democracy. You could certainly conclude from what he said that there is no good political system. That's how I read it, that there is no good political system. From the standpoint of the truth, the true human goods, there is no human system able to put in place all that is good for human flourishing. If you see the American system as the one that was created to deliver the state that you would create, you may have the wrong idea of what the American system is. Only people like you could deliver the state that you would create, because America is the people. What is it going to take for you to undo what the Supreme Court has done about same-sex marriage? Even though Justice Kennedy, who is a strong supporter of states' rights, said the states would decide this, the Supreme Court has provided the rationale for overturning state bans on same-sex marriage. What is it going to take to stop the unfolding of what these people predict? If you put people in power who will not use that rationale, how can you stop the people from voting in replacements for your people? You would have to change the people so they no longer saw what you are saying as bigotry. And so we're back again with the power of reason. Teach them what marriage really is. You may have had the experience of trying that. Maybe a colleague at lunch, maybe at the dinner table. Your children ask you, why not let gays marry? Who really cares? If gays marry, is traditional marriage going to go away? How have you found those conversations have gone? I listened to the efforts of highly articulate prosecutors speaking to the Supreme Court last March, answering the question, what harm would be done to the institution of marriage or to opposite-sex couples by allowing gay couples to marry? Justice Kagan. Or the question of Justice Breyer. What precisely is the way in which allowing gay couples to marry would interfere with the vision of marriage as procreation of children? That is, how would it stop people who believe in marriage, as is defined in Genesis 2:24, from creating fertile soil for the raising of children, a committed union in which a man and a woman are both present? What do you say to those questions? How have those discussions gone? Or how about this question? If marriage has to do with children, why are sterile heterosexuals allowed to marry, whereas gays and lesbians are barred from marriage because their sexual acts are not reproductive? We do not forbid postmenopausal women to marry, so to forbid gays and lesbians for this reason is the clearest possible example of a double standard. Now, this author that I'm quoting has read the philosophers who have answered this question. He writes, Finis tries to answer this question by calling genital intercourse between sterile heterosexuals acts of the reproductive kind. This is surely cheating. Acts that are not reproductive are not acts of the reproductive kind. Such an act has the visual appearance of being of a reproductive kind, but between sterile people, it is obviously an act of an unreproductive kind. Doesn't that make sense? Sure it does. But I think Gersman is wrong nonetheless. Because to be a thing of a certain kind, human beings say, you have to possess the defining properties of a human being. What if you're born without a leg? 2 legs is not a defining feature of a human being. Possessing legs is called an accidental feature, because you can lack a leg and still be of the human kind. Defects are, this logical distinction we get from Aristotle, accidental. Sterility is accidental. Now, I bet that even though I have explained why sex between sterile heterosexuals is not different from sex between a fertile man and woman, but an act of the same kind, only with a different effect, which is accidental, I suspect you may have nodded off during this explanation. But don't you owe me your attention? I'm not sure I have convinced everyone here. I could, of course, go over it again more slowly, explaining in more detail the difference between accidental and essential features and how this difference matters, but I can hear the snoring already. And maybe you see what I'm getting at. I'm not sure you would have the patience. And if you were on the other side, pro-same-sex marriage, I think your impatience would be pretty high. Something might truly hinge on this distinction, but what can we expect here? People are not going to follow. How would we teach this to people? How willing are they to learn? And why would they be patient enough to listen when they really don't believe what I have said makes sense? How could they trust that it makes sense? So what can we say to defenders of same-sex marriage to correct them? You may have paid up to come here and get from me the thing to say. I believe with Robert George and Aquinas and Augustine that right and wrong are objectively ordained. Right and wrong are in the natural God-established order of things. The basis of our understanding of right and wrong is not the concept of values. The great 20-volume Oxford English Dictionary, which lists the earliest documented use of English words, right, the first appearance of every English word, had no entry for the word values until the 1986 supplement, which located the earliest use of the English word values in a work of sociology published in 1918. What does that tell us? This values business, that a thing is good because certain people value it, is something new. Sure enough, there was no ancient word for values. Aristotle and Plato had no such word at all. There was good and bad, right and wrong. So it's a mistake. But this is the way that people see ethics today. Wikipedia informs us that ethics is the study of values. Universities and standard texts in philosophy concur. Now, what is the thing to say to all these people that would show them that they are wrong? And what is the thing to say to all these people that would show them that they are wrong about marriage? Well, here's what I want to say about marriage. The supporters of same-sex marriage ask, is traditional marriage going to go away if we accept gay marriages? I say back, no, it is never going to go away. Intercourse and babies and matrimony between men and women, all of that will still be with us in a major way in 2064. There will still be Americans who continue to view marriage in the traditional way, and even people who approve of same-sex marriage who will keep the old institution with us by getting married. But it is still going to be a kind of tragedy if the definition of marriage gets changed. And you have to change it, by the way, to share it. You have to change the definition of marriage to share marriage equally. It is frankly a little odd, logically. You say you want what we have, marriage, but now we have to change the definition of what we have so you can have it. Why, if you want it? Actually, you don't want what we have, and you want what we have to be understood in the law as something else. Interesting. Why, if you just want to join us? But I was saying it is going to be some kind of tragedy if the definition of marriage is changed from the union of a man and a woman who make a permanent and exclusive commitment to each other of the type that is naturally fulfilled by bearing and rearing children together. Definition 1 from this book about this. Changed from that to 2, the union of two people, whether of the same sex or of opposite sexes, who commit to romantically loving and caring for each other and to sharing the burdens and benefits of domestic life. Going to be a tragedy if this switch is made, because once that is what marriage is, the second definition, then the benefits of the traditional view of marriage will have been driven out from what we celebrate. They won't be gone, but they will have been driven out from what we celebrate. What benefits? Creating new citizens, making them new citizens, and committing to be there to shape them. Americans were among the people who agreed that by and large the best setup fit to make you a sound, cared for, and together citizen is a marriage between your parents, where the mother and the father have committed to being together in one family. And to be really top-notch, you need more than parents who just live together, show up at the dinner table. But showing up at the dinner table day after day is not nothing. It's actually quite something. Two people showing up, contributing, teaching these children, the money they make coming back to the family, enough extended family to get help when things go wrong, and then, when the parents get old, switching it around. So once again, the weak are cared for by the strong. These are all basic features of marriage, even by that slim definition that you see here. This is the work done by the institution. And yes, the institution will still be there, but the word marriage won't name it. I guess we could just give it a name, call it traditional marriage. But the word marriage in the culture, in the law, won't celebrate these benefits. That was the work done by the concept of marriage, to name and single out for honor and pride these unique social benefits. I mean, nothing else can generate these benefits. Whatever mess people might have made of their own particular marriages, the word marriage still singled out the standard they missed, named the institution through which we get those societal goods. Will we still have those goods? I think we will. Will people begin to forget what the old notion of family, having children, staying together as mom and dad, etc. Will people begin to forget what that is? Well, a lot of people have forgotten this because they have had no experience of it. It's not part of their experience. Frederica Matthews Green made a very good point when she said that marriage has already been diminished in the culture by quick and easy divorce, which is one of the reasons why people have no experience of it. Diminished also, I would say, by a culture that treats marriage as a kind of ultimate self-indulgence. Is one of the other things that's happened to marriage already. Kind of ultimate self-indulgence where you should go to get what you want, where if he or she really makes you happy, if you really want to be with him or her, then you should. And where on your big day, it should be just the way you want it. It should be like royalty, because it's all about you two sweet things. The culture has already done just about all it can to turn marriage from a place of giving, a vehicle of service, into a thing for me. Well, this new definition is just going to put a frame on that, because it takes out of the definition the bit that really does turn marriage from a time of fun into a work of service. Don't you need that time of fun before that service? Sure you do. I certainly think back fondly to those blessed days of freedom. But that time of fun is naturally fulfilled by generating children who draw us into a level of service that is actually maybe purer than that between husband and wife. You don't think of your children as failing to make you happy, a delusion about marriage that for some reason we keep falling for in relation to our spouse. Why should we just drop down now to a definition that leaves out the thing that so deeply marks marriage as a cultural good? If we change the definition, the benefits of the traditional view of marriage will have been driven out from what we celebrate with the word marriage, because we, the country, don't celebrate it anymore. People can celebrate it. Those traditionalists who still honor that idea can celebrate it. No one is stopping them. but we, the people, are not joining them. We made that clear in 2014, 15, 16, when state by state we took the word marriage from heterosexual unions and gave it to public bonds of love, which is now, we said, what the word marriage is going to mean in these United States. We, the people, don't talk about marriage in that old way. It's not our vocabulary. Those people do. What difference will that make? Well, if we don't know, I'm not sure that's very encouraging. If it is only those people, the people in this room, you people, and your allies, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, who would retain the definition, who, when they talk about marriage, are supporters and cultivators of these goods, if it is only these people, that could be a tragedy. Because when you band together to rid yourself of a vocabulary whose work and role you have not understood or identified or taken the time to explore, you can come to regret it. When marriage as it used to be is still around, yes, but not part of the culture, as a thing given status by a name. What could this mean? The first rule of tinkering, says David Mamet, is save all the parts. A culture can cultivate you in many subtle ways. What has been the benefit of just having the word marriage mean what it has meant? A culture cultivates. It is a greenhouse, an environment in which every citizen can benefit from the mist and the temperature and just grow leafy. He doesn't have to philosophize himself into fruitfulness because the culture encourages it. But culture can be dismantled, stripped down. Save all the parts, says Mamet, because you may find out you shouldn't have taken that part out. Now, where did we stop before I went into this? I was giving you my view on the problem with changing the definition of marriage. How do we get into that? That is my answer, part of it, to the question, what to say to those judges or to the advocates of same-sex marriage. I would add something more. If you change the meaning of marriage so that gays can have the status of being married, because they can't get in on the concept as it is presently defined, everyone sees that. They don't want marriages as they are presently defined. If you change the meaning of marriage so that gays too can have something called marriage, you are not sharing marriage. You aren't widening the definition of marriage so that others can marry too. You are tearing down the standing concept of marriage, which won't fit gays, and condemning it as a bad definition, tearing that down, then putting up in its place what you believe is a better definition, a nicer one, because it will fit gays. That is not sharing marriage. It's not extending the law's recognition of the right to marry, since the right to marry in the law is about marriage by the definition just rejected. Justice Kennedy said that a few years ago, the state of New York acted, I quote, acted to enlarge the definition of marriage to correct an injustice. But it didn't enlarge the definition. There was no injustice with that definition. You could get injustice only if you changed the definition of marriage to something gays could have, voluntary bonds of love. Can they have that? Yes. Change the definition of marriage to voluntary bonds of love, and then deny them marriage by that definition. That would be unjust. Well, there's a bit of an irony here. Who are the people who understand that marriage is really a union consisting of bonds of love and who won't share this with others who are truly able to participate in that? Where are the bigots? They don't exist. Marriage by the old definition does not create a problem of inequality in which something others could have is not offered to them. It is offered to them, but that form of sexuality they don't want. It's not an equality issue at all. It is an issue of what job you want the concept of marriage to do, what you want marriage to mean. It's not a clash between bigots and rights defenders. It is a clash of purposes, a clash between those who want the concept of marriage to do this job and those who want it to do that job. A supporter of the tradition wants the concept of marriage to accord status to the unions most conducive to everyone's welfare, every last person. The union most conducive to the good formation of every last person is a committed union between the people who create you. Exceptions don't wipe that fact away. These are statistically the interpersonal relations most central to the good of the nation. Some people want marriage to name those unions that deliver that good. They want marriage to be that institution. What is the other purpose? A supporter of same-sex marriage, on the other hand, wants marriage to be what gives gay unions and other unions equal status. That is what the concept should accomplish. This is just ordinary politics, ordinary competing views about what is better. This is just ordinary politics, opposing views about what is of greater value. There's no bigotry here. You can't say that one has greater value than the other because the other is bigoted, because neither is bigoted. The question is, are the uses of the word marriage that one side is defending more important than the uses of the other? Are the benefits of one definition of marriage more valuable to the nation than the benefits of the other? And there are two different arguments here. But you notice that one of the costs of changing the definition is the punishment of people who do not think this is good for the country. Now, what I just said and what I said before that about how we will no longer, as a nation, attach traditional marriage the recognition it once had, we won't do that as a nation, all of that, you notice, is not a soundbite. Can it be said in fewer words? How did we get to talking about this? Our question was, what action can we take to teach the people which view of marriage is right? To give them the light, which is crucial in America because of the status of the people. How do you teach people what marriage really is so that the people come up with the right laws and leave those laws in place? We are back to the power of reason. Well, I can't even get people to listen to what I have to say on this. The people whose minds I want to change just get impatient. I'd be interrupted 50 times before I got any of that out, and anyone who would have listened, what would their response be? There are people who will listen. John Corvino, a philosopher and gay rights advocate in Detroit, who spent lots of time speaking together with Maggie Gallagher. I believe Corvino would listen to the argument I have just made, and in the end, he would just come back with something of his own. It wouldn't speak to him. Is it, in fact, a fiction that there is something you can say to teach people what marriage really is? Does that beast even exist? Those who have eyes to see, see. But you have to be given that power. A thing is right because of what is, not what you feel. But you have to be given the receptivity to what is outside and greater than yourself. Now, it is perfectly true that there are people on the fence. And by this I mean people positioned to be moved. They have no deep inner commitment to a view that actually owns them at the moment. They enjoy freedom on this issue. Those people can, I think, be swayed. Their minds can be changed. But in the world, people are bound. The world is a world of bondage to sin. And you know, I understand the liberal college student who thinks that sex is a pivotal and orienting experience and puts this at the center of his or her life and counts on contraceptives, needs them to create this space in his life of sex, a space that doesn't spill kids into the rest of his life. You may think it terrible of me to say this, but what else does this student know that he would place above that? We are all in bondage to the love for temporal things until we are freed from it. And even you and I are not freed, not fully. Augustine said we could never in this life be fully freed of earthly attachments. And you have said the same thing if you have said we can never completely give up the sin. He said, in this life our virtue cannot be made complete. Our very righteousness too, though true insofar as it has respect to the true good, is yet in this life of such a kind that it consists rather in the remission of sins. Our goodness amounts to forgiveness. We can be forgiven. Than in the perfecting of virtues. For as reason, though subjected to God, is yet pressed down by the corruptible body, so long as it is in this mortal condition, it has not perfect authority over vice. What does Augustine say here? Reason is corrupt. It is in the grip of corruption. Reason does not have perfect authority over vice, even though we have submitted ourselves to God. The life of a faithful believer is a life of freeing from bondage. Have I been saved? I am being saved because I am still bound to futile things. But I wish to be freed, and I know that I cannot free myself.